Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, so today we're diving into something that's honestly one of the biggest mysteries in biology: how our bodies actually navigate the physical world. I mean, think about it. When you reach out to grab your morning coffee or you just take a step forward, it feels completely instant, right? Seamless, unified. But right beneath your skin, there's this sprawling, highly complex network firing off electrical and chemical signals at over 100 meters per second. Now, for well over a century, science has relied on a few core assumptions about how this incredible network operates. But as we're going to see, a massive new discovery has just completely rewritten the rulebook. So to really kick things off, we need to challenge a rule that's been almost universally accepted. Historically, the going theory in neuroscience was that your brain is the ultimate centralized commander of your body. The traditional thinking goes kind of like this. Your brain makes a decision, it shoots a command down the spinal cord, and your limbs just obey, like a strict top-down hierarchy. But brace yourself, because this long-standing idea of centralized, micromanaged motor control, yeah, it might actually be completely wrong.
To put into perspective why this is such a game changer, we first have to wrap our heads around the sheer scale of the system we're talking about. 100 billion. That's roughly the number of neurons in the human brain. To give you an idea, that is basically the same number of stars in the entire Milky Way galaxy, literally packed right inside your skull. It is an astronomical number of individual cells, and each one has the ability to influence thousands of others. This giant web is what generates your perception of the world, your memories, your behaviors, the whole shebang. It's incredibly daunting to study, which is exactly why we need to break down how these neurons actually work before we get to this latest breakthrough.
Section 1. Anatomy of the network. Okay, so to understand the stakes of this paradigm shift, let's look at this stark contrast between our two main nervous systems. First, we have the central nervous system, or CNS, which is your brain and your spinal cord. This is the heavily protected command center, completely shielded by your skull and your vertebral column. Then you have the peripheral nervous system, the PNS. These are all the sensory and motor neurons that extend out to your limbs and your organs. Think of the CNS as the generals safely tucked away in a bunker, and the PNS as the soldiers out on the front lines. Now, the really interesting distinction here is regeneration. If the CNS gets damaged, those nerve fibers generally cannot regenerate. But out in the periphery, those exposed nerves of the PNS often can repair themselves. Section 2. The micro level. How neurons communicate. Zooming way in from that macro anatomy down to the cellular level, we find that the nervous system relies on this incredibly fast point-to-point communication. Because, unlike hormones, which kind of act like a broadcast signal just floating through your bloodstream, this communication relies entirely on what's called a synapse. A synapse is simply the microscopic gap where all this vital communication happens between neurons. Basically, a signal travels down the long fiber of a neuron as an electrochemical wave, but when it hits the end of the line, it has to find a way to cross that synaptic cleft to pass the message to the very next cell. And when you look at how this process unfolds, it is a literal split-second chain reaction. Once that electrical wave reaches the end of the first neuron, it triggers this sudden rush of calcium. That calcium influx acts as a trigger, forcing these tiny storage bubbles called synaptic vesicles to fuse with the cell membrane and just dump their contents straight into the gap. Those contents, they're neurotransmitters, which are specialized chemical messengers. They float across that tiny space, bind to receptor molecules on the second cell, and pass the signal along. And incredibly, that entire super complex sequence takes only a fraction of a millisecond. Section 3. The 2026 breakthrough, the fruit fly connectome. All right, so now that we know the basic rules of the network, let's look at a monumental discovery from June 2026 that completely shatters our traditional assumptions. To really get this, we have to scale way down. A huge international research team didn't try to map the 100 billion neurons of a human. Instead, they mapped the central nervous system of an adult fruit fly, which has about 160,000 neurons. But hey, don't let that small number fool you. Even with a fraction of the hardware, fruit flies can navigate, socialize, and pull off mid-air maneuvers that would honestly make a fighter pilot dizzy. So, researchers led by teams at Harvard Medical School and Princeton University pulled off something we used to think was pretty much impossible. They created the very first full brain-to-body wiring map, what's known as a connectome. They literally sliced a single fruit fly into thousands of microscopic sections, just an unbelievably grueling process. Then they used artificial intelligence to stitch those millions of electron microscope images into a unified 3D map. For the very first time ever, science could trace every single connection, down to the level of individual synapses, from the fly's brain all the way through its nerve cord. Section 4. the paradigm shift, localizing motor control. Well, when researchers finally got their hands on this complete roadmap showing how information flows from sensation to action, they uncovered a massive plot twist. That long-standing idea that the brain micromanages every little action, completely wrong. It turns out motor control is highly distributed. When they traced the exact circuits responsible for making the fly walk, they found that the movement of one leg is mostly governed by local neural circuits located right there in that specific leg. The central brain isn't directing the individual steps. The leg is essentially controlling itself, with its local circuits talking directly to the local circuits in the other legs to coordinate walking. How crazy is that? Alexander Bates, a researcher at Harvard Medical School, summed it up perfectly. He said, "Our findings suggest that control for actions is highly distributed in local modules that link up and work together in different ways. So it's not a top-down dictatorship, it's a collaborative effort. The visual system, the leg modules, the wing modules, they all just link up and share information to drive behavior. It completely flips the script on how we understand biological movement." Section 5. The future of neuroscience. Now, you might be wondering, why does the microscopic wiring of a tiny insect matter to you and me? Well, because this gives scientists a massive proof of concept that's going to shape the entire future of neuroscience. Researchers are already planning to expand this connectome mapping to more complex animals, like mice. And by realizing that motor control is actually distributed, medical science can completely reevaluate how we treat human conditions, like peripheral neuropathy, which is where those local frontline nerves we talked about get damaged. Plus, since so many discoveries from fruit flies actually carry over to mammals, this could unlock totally new secrets about human memory and spatial navigation. But, biology is really only half the story here. This connectome is an absolute goldmine for artificial intelligence. Harvard researcher Helen Young made a great point. She noted that even our absolute best AI agents and robots still can't navigate the physical world as flawlessly as a simple fruit fly. So computer scientists are eagerly digging into this new biological connectome. By mimicking how a fly's nervous system distributes control locally, rather than relying on one giant central processor, engineers are hoping to build the next generation of highly agile, intelligent robotics. It's a real game changer. It's just incredible to think that the blueprint for future technology might be hiding in the microscopic wiring of a tiny fly. But more importantly, it makes us look inward, right? If a fly's legs are managing their own movement, what local neural circuits are secretly controlling your body right beneath your conscious awareness? Next time you take a walk or reach for a cup of coffee, just remember, it might not actually be your brain doing all the heavy lifting. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer, and keep questioning the incredible biology happening inside you every single second.